target. You are authorized to fire at will.
Hey, thanks for stopping by. Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. If you have not yet, make sure you are either following me on Rumble or you are subscribed on YouTube and that you have hit the bell icon to get notifications. Make sure you're checking out the merchandise between now and the end of April. Any proceeds that I make from the sale of merchandise or from coffee, portion of those proceeds will be matched by Right American Media and the people who make my merchandise, up to $100 a piece. And we will be donating that to the 22-0 folks to help prevent veteran suicide. So let's get down to it. My message inbox has been on Facebook and on Twitter has been getting inundated with message after message after message saying, hey, you've got to watch this, watch the water, watch the water. You have to see this. You have to see what these guys are exposing. You have to see what they've discovered. You have to see what they've done. You have to see the truth that they have brought out. And so I finally broke down and I watched it. And then I made some commentary and just a very brief commentary on, and it was not polite in the sense of I didn't come out and was and address it in a way where, they make some, good points. So therefore it was pretty pointed. I believe that this is going to be a distraction at the very least. And it's, and that's at the best. At the worst, it's far worse than that. It's far more nefarious. But there's also something else going on, and so we're gonna address it here. So I want to preface everything that I'm about to say with I have been digging into this for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and nothing that I have watched has changed my mind about the dangerous preconceived conclusions that Brian has arrived at based on some faulty theology and some faulty biblical understanding. And we're going to address that in this video as I do a breakdown. And what I want you to understand is it's not personal. And by the way, this is fair use. So even though this is a documentary interview that was filmed by someone else, I am using this as a fair use issue to be able to go through and point out where I'm having problems with what was said. So without any further ado, let's get started.
So earlier this month, a lot of you may remember a post that I made on my Telegram channel. There was a lot of concern about the water and not to drink it. And there were certain things that I could say and could not say. And I referenced that certain people's lives might be at risk. And one of those people is here with me now, Dr. Bryan Ardis. Thanks a lot for being here.
I do really appreciate the opportunity to do this. Yeah, this is actually going to be the only time I've ever been nervous in any interview. I'm not kidding. Like, I've never been nervous to discuss anything in relationship to the COVID pandemic whatsoever. But this has bothered me and has scared me.
Putting things out is probably oftentimes the best way to protect yourself. But people have lost their lives over what you're about to tell the world.
We have to address right away the overly dramatic music and these overly dramatic pictures and images that are being used to set the tone for just how serious this is. And then this assertion without any documentation of people who have lost their lives for what Dr. Ardis is about to share. And he's going to get to the case of a person who lost their life, with it being a foregone conclusion that this person lost their life over this issue without ever actually demonstrating how that actually took place. So it's just an assertion. It's a conclusion that's arrived at and just asserted, and there's no evidence demonstrated to that.
I have to get this off my chest. My spirit's like screaming to say something and bring it to the forefront to protect as many innocent lives as possible. That's all I've been trying to do since May of 2020.
And there again, here's this assertion. His spirit is screaming at him. Well, just because you are claiming that you feel something in the spirit doesn't mean that what you're feeling in the spirit is accurate or right. The scriptures are very clear on that we aren't to just we're test all the spirits, including our own.
As you know, when I read Anthony Fauci's memo on remdesivir, when I actually just clicked the links to the studies that he was quoting saying that remdesivir was safe and effective, I knew right away that he was lying. I knew right away that this drug was going to be used to mass murder a whole bunch of innocent people in America that did not need to die. Then he was going to sell the world on the idea in the media that they were dying of a virus, when in fact I knew they were being poisoned to death with this drug. I knew 30% of all people were going to experience multiple organ failure, kidney failure, septic shock, and hypotension. That's what the studies said. Now we're a year and a half after that, and it's exactly the numbers that I said based on those studies.
Remdesivir is definitely dangerous.
Everywhere I go, which is odd for a retired chiropractor to be referenced as a pharmaceutical guy. But it is true, remdesivir is a very toxic, deadly drug. There are a lot of medical doctors and professionals who will mention that as it's just proven to be ineffective. It is not ineffective. It is very toxic and deadly. It is
no
known
arguments.
And proven to actually injure specific organs in your body. It targets specific organs. This is a part of why I think my spirit is so moved to make sure this gets out, is that in January, January 21st of this year, so just 2 months ago, the FDA decided to authorize remdesivir as the only drug to be authorized to be used in all newborns in this country. I cannot even fathom the men or women in charge that would actually do that. So it's now been moved since January 21st of 2022. It's been moved out of hospitals as the only drug to be used, only allowed in hospitals this entire pandemic. Now they're moving it into in and out of hospital care for children as young as newborns 7 pounds heavy through the 18-year pediatric age range. It's the only authorized drug. There is nothing else that they're allowing for COVID-19 treatment. And I find that incredibly evil. And then they've also now canceled monoclonal antibody uses throughout the United States and all U.S. territories for COVID-19 early treatment, and they're moving remdesivir to the infusion centers where they were using monoclonal antibodies as the only IV infusion drug allowed. I have been moved with one singular purpose since May of 2020. When I read Anthony Fauci's memo about remdesivir, I felt this spark inside of me that I now had to go voice to the world a warning to try to protect as many innocent lives as possible from being killed. So let's talk about what happened. It all started with a text. There's a medical doctor that I admire and love because he is nonstop from the beginning of COVID and has had the ability to project information and say to people around the world, you do not have to fear COVID. We have an answer. This guy has been on many stages with me. He still practices right now medicine and is an ER doc. And he sent me a text. It actually was dated December 1st. And I did not see it until like December 18th. I don't know how I didn't see it, but the text read, "Hey, Dr. Artis, if you got bit by a rattlesnake, would you go to a hospital and get anti-venom?" And I realized when I saw him that he must have saw an interview I did on InfoWars. So Kate Daly did an interview with me and wanted to go over my thoughts on monoclonal antibodies. Well, I'd been given some research studies that actually bothered me. I didn't like the idea based on the data in these research studies. I didn't think monoclonal antibodies were safe long term, not short term, but long term. And I read the actual text message, got in the shower, and while I was in the shower, I was sitting there thinking, why would he send me that text? It has nothing to do with COVID, like zero, nothing to do with COVID. So I'm going through this and I'm thinking about the text, and all my brain keeps going to is, why is he mentioning, wouldn't I go get anti-venom? Is there something about anti-venom I don't know? So I actually got out of the shower, went down on the internet, and I wanted to know what is anti-venom? Only to find out that most antivenoms are monoclonal antibodies or polyclonal antibodies. And then I got it. Then I knew why he sent it to me. He wanted me to immediately see a question that he knew I would say, of course I would. If I got bit by a rattlesnake, of course I'm going to go to the hospital and get anti-venom. So in his mind, I think he knew this was a way, or God inspired him.
And right here, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the big assertions that this guy was inspired by God to send that text. That's bordering on prophecy. So Brian concludes that this guy sends him a text message about, which, by the way, we don't actually see the actual text. We don't know who it is. We don't know what really took place. I'm not saying this is a lie, but to make the leap from a text saying, hey, if you got bit by a rattlesnake, would you go to the hospital and take an anti-venom, to draw any other conclusion, to any conclusion about the motivation without knowing the background is dangerous. But to jump to God inspired him is very dangerous. But that's the presupposition of everything that Brian says and throughout this entire documentary. And he has an end goal in mind, a place where he's going with this. And so he has to make this assertion on the front end to justify the spiritualizing of a text about rattlesnake bites and anti-venom.
To send me this message that Dr. Artis would be able to relate yes to the answer, then go figure out why it is he would say yes. Okay, this is where it all started. I will repeat what Steve Kirsch said to an audience with me last month. He said, if the CDC says something to do, you do the opposite. If
I agree.
NIH says to do something, go the opposite. FDA, do the opposite. I'm sitting there realizing that antivenom is monoclonal antibodies, and then I immediately revert back to, in my own head, I'm not trusting anything the CDC, NIH, or FDA says. Is our federal health agencies, are they recommending monoclonal antibodies for COVID-19? Now, this is in the middle of December. No, they're not. They've been bad-mouthing monoclonal antibodies this whole time.
Stripped them out of Florida when DeSantis wanted to use them.
And then January 21st of this year, they totally stripped out monoclonal antibodies. They do not want you touching monoclonal antibodies. They also didn't want you from the beginning to touch hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
They also don't want you touching ivermectin. They also don't want you touching NAC and acetylcysteine. So the things they tell you to avoid, we know they're telling you to avoid because they work. So when I realized,
Not necessarily going to argue with that.
Actually, we're not supporting monoclonal antibodies. I mean, it's very, in an instant, I realized I was wrong.
Right.
That the CDC, NIH, and the FDA are bad-mouthing monoclonal antibodies for a reason. They know they work.
And we believe that this is because they want people intentionally to not recover.
Absolutely certain.
Yeah.
No, there's no doubt about that. But no, this actually got way more evil for me since I read that text than even before I read the text. I cannot believe the amount of evil behind this pandemic with what I've realized since then. I realized all of a sudden that monoclonal antibodies are anti-venom. The federal government doesn't want us using anti-venom.
So I want you guys to recognize this assertion. Monoclonal antibodies are antivenom. That's what he just said. That he didn't say that antivenoms are monoclonal antibodies. He said monoclonal antibodies are antivenom. And the truth of this scientifically is that not every monoclonal antibody is a antivenom. Okay? Period. End of discussion. There is a massive amount of information out there that demonstrates this, but Brian just asserted that monoclonal antibodies are antivenom. And so his assertion is that, well, you're going to get there, but we have to understand he just made an assertion that is untrue. Not all monoclonal antibodies are antivenom.
Why are they bashing antivenom, and why are we finding antivenom works against COVID? Is it not a virus? Is it a venom? Like, this is what I want to know. Like, is...
So he's made this jump now from monoclonal antibodies making up antivenoms to now all monoclonal antibodies are antivenoms. So now it's not that they're just against monoclonal antibodies. They're against antivenom. And why are they against antivenom? Is it because the virus is actually a venom? See, these are illogical, unreasonable leaps that he's already come to in his mind because of the question about antivenoms and it being rattlesnake bit. And so now everything he's going to do is going to be, he's going to go out and do confirmation bias research.
This is why they don't want you using monoclonal antibodies.
I mean, that sounds completely insane as a theory.
It is completely insane.
I mean, how would the masses be infected by snake bites?
Yeah. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you believe the mass media is controlled?
Of course.
You actually do believe that?
Yes.
So you believe that whatever's being pumped out in the media is being orchestrated and controlled?
Of course.
Like across all of it?
Across all of it.
Yeah.
This is a setup question. It's a setup. I don't trust legacy media. I do believe that the legacy media works as a propaganda arm for the federal state and the state. But it's a setup question to build this premise. It's a very dangerous position. And just so you know, my friend Mike is working on getting Dr. Ardis on with us on Vet Nation to have this conversation. And I will not treat this with softball questions. I'm not going to treat it with kid gloves.
All right. So in my head, I was like, okay, how do they keep people on that story? So there's this mass media group who are telling a huge story. They're all telling the same story around the world. Whenever anybody says anything against that narrative, what do they use now to combat that in the mainstream media?
Disinformation.
Yeah, they call them fact checkers.
Yeah, fact checkers. Yeah.
Fact checking is the opposite of fact checking.
The arbiters of lies are the fact checkers.
By definition, fact checkers are to divert you from truth and take you back to a narrative you're being sold worldwide.
Right.
If it's true that COVID could actually be snake venom.
If it's true that COVID could be a snake venom, okay, do you see the problem with this? He's already determined in his mind that the Coof is actually snake venom, which is why the government is anti-venom, because COVID is snake venom. Therefore, all of the fact checkers who are out there labeling things disinformation are going to be pointing us away from this, right? So he's preconceived notions. Every conclusion that he's going to arrive at is just miraculously going to line up with his preconceived notion to therefore then support the fact in his mind that COVID is a snake venom.
And how I got there was they don't support the use of antivenom called monoclonal antibodies.
Right.
And there again, he did it again. They don't support the use of antivenom called monoclonal antibodies. Once again, monoclonal antibodies are not all snake venom. that are antivenoms. Not every monoclonal is an antivenom.
Because they work. The easiest way to figure that out is, has that ever been fact checked? And I wanted to know, was there ever any mention that the source could have been a snake?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I couldn't believe it. Over and over and over in the media in January, in February of 2020 are nonstop publications that the original source could either be from bats, snakes, or pangolins. And every time the snake is mentioned, fact checkers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, constantly fact check it and spin it to the bats. There's no fact checking about bats.
Keep this in mind that so it's fact checking. Okay. I have problems with fact checkers. But they also poo-pooed the idea of bats for a while, and they've also poo-pooed the idea of pangolins. And so confirmation bias. We have to be very careful about our confirmation bias. We want to so hate these people for what they've done to us over the last 2 years that we're going to allow our confirmation bias to get to us. And so you go back to this guy's original text that he got. If you got bit by a rattlesnake, would you go to the hospital and get an antivenom? Maybe what the doctor friend was doing was telling him, look, monoclonal antibodies are safe. Did you know that antivenoms are made up of monoclonal antibodies? So if you would take an antivenom for a snake bite, why wouldn't you take a monoclonal antibody for something else? But he's determined that God somehow moved in this man's spirit to inspire him to send this text to get him to go down this rabbit trail that Coof is a snake bite or a snake venom, and all monoclonal antibodies are snake or antivenoms, and therefore on and on and on. Now listen to this comparison that he makes here.
They keep letting you look at bats. In the beginning, in January of 2020, the scientists inside of China said this can't be from these bats. These bats hibernate and it's the winter. When they did genetic sequences from the antibodies in the people who were sick in Wuhan, they found that their genetic sequence was not most like bats. They were most like two snakes.
So it couldn't be the bats because the bats hibernate in the winter. Okay. Snakes hibernate in the winter as well. That's a non-starter.
From the Chinese crate and the king cobra.
By the way, the king cobra is not a Chinese
there's a research
animal.
study published in France where they're finding that the receptors in the brain called nicotinic acetylcholinesterase receptors, that these are actually bound most tightly to snake venom of crate and cobra is what they're finding, and that the spike protein from SARS-CoV-2 is most identical to Chinese crate and king cobra venom. Then I find out that there's an actual doctor who works at the University of Pittsburgh.
Now here comes the assertion about a death. And so you got to watch this, pay very close attention to the implication without any substantive argument to verify or prove his point.
In May.
This is insane right here.
May of 2020.
Yeah.
Works in a computational lab dealing with genetic sequencing. And he's been researching for 5 months, sequencing of spike proteins, trying to solve the mystery of SARS-CoV-2 victims. And he says he's got a big press release. They're going to actually announce all their findings. And Bing Liu is his name.
Setback in the quest to understand coronavirus after a researcher is shot and killed. 37-year-old Bing Liu was on the verge of making significant findings on COVID-19.
And that's when I freaked out. Also, all of the clippings in the media when they interview his boss, who is still at the University of Pittsburgh, last name is Ballard. Every time he was interviewed, he said that they were going to publish the work they found through Bing Liu's work in their department. That's never been published. I'd like to know why a year and a half later that's never been published.
A year and a half.
Where is it? And then all of a sudden the realization came that this is the great lie. When I say that they have lied to you about everything.
Now notice, Bing Liu was assassinated. That's the implication, even though he didn't use those words. Bing Liu was assassinated. The paperwork or the research was never released, but here's the conclusion that he draws because it was never released.
Thing in relationship to COVID, they've even lied about the viral part of COVID. Now you have to understand here, my entire stance for the last year and a half has been to educate, warn people about hospital protocols because of a drug called remdesivir.
Right.
Thank God he's doing that.
So, in this realization that this could all be related to venom, something bothered me in the January 21st EUA that came out from the FDA about remdesivir. In this 42-page document, it actually says there's only one drug that cannot be co-administered with remdesivir at the same time because it negates the antiviral properties of remdesivir, and that drug is hydroxychloroquine. In 2020, January, there's this incredible study that's published where there's been over like a 10-year period where a company has been funding a research study gene mapping all the genes of the venoms and proteins and peptides inside of king cobra venom. And in January 2020, they published their findings. Oh, ask me if I was shocked when I saw that it was 19 toxic venom proteins that they isolated that specifically target organs in your body. So I go to the funding part of this study, and I want to know, well, who funded this and how many companies? It says that the majority of the company's funding and studies funding came from a company called Genentech. Genentech is a subsidiary of a company called Roche. I don't know anything about these companies. I've never even heard of them. The employees of Genentech, who were the authors of this study, said they have a conflict of interest because they actually hold shares and stocks in Roche. And all I did was go like this. This is not a joke. I was like, Genentech. I've never heard of Genentech. Is there a correlation between Genentech and Gilead? This is not a joke. I typed it on the internet. Is there a connection to Genentech and Gilead? Oh my God. Gilead bought 2 facilities that deal with biological studies from Genentech in 2011 and then brought 55 of their executives into Gilead in 2011, just when that King Cobra study started. Gilead is the manufacturer of remdesivir. Guess what's been known since 2005 blocks the nicotine receptors in the brainstem being injured by cobra venom and viper venom. Guess what drug does that? Hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine. Remdesivir, packaged and stored as it is delivered to hospitals, comes in a little glass vial.
So this is a ridiculous conclusion. It is what he's about to say. I don't know if any of you have ever watched the documentary Making a Murderer, and they go through and they're fully set on proving that these 2 guys in Making a Murderer were innocent and they were framed. And there's a scene in one of the episodes where the attorney opens up a box from evidence and they pick up a vial of blood that's in the evidence locker, in the evidence box, in the styrofoam, and they open it up and there's a hole in the top of it. And they go, this proves that their DNA, his DNA was injected into this bottle. And the bottle that they're holding is a vacuum seal bottle, right? Well, anybody who's worth their salt when it comes to what blood draws do, that blood gets injected into that vacuum seal bottle through that hole. They make the hole when they inject it. It doesn't get capped. That bottle's sealed in such a way that you go through the barrier, creating what appears to be a hole, and you inject the blood in there so it remains stable and sterile inside of that. They determined that this proves that the blood was the DNA was extracted and used to frame up the murderers. That is exactly the same kind of leap that he goes to here to prove his point about snake venom.
It's called lyophilized powder. It actually has a white to yellowish tint. Guess what color snake venom has when it's stored? Then to be diluted and
A lot of things have a white to yellowish tint when they're stored.
sodium chloride or distilled water to be
Insulin can sometimes have a milky look to it as it's stored in the same kind of bottle. Is it snake venom?
administered in an IV. Or if people are buying king cobra venom lyophilized, they mix it in the same preparation as listed on the fact sheet for remdesivir to actually take cobra venom or any other viper venom and inject it into horses to make monoclonal antibodies. When you read the emergency use authorization for remdesivir, it states, this one from January 21st, that every practitioner who administers this to a COVID patient, pediatric or not, you have to evaluate for what's called prothrombin time. Prothrombin time means if it increases the prothrombin time, it means it's taking your blood's ability to coagulate and making it longer. So it thins your blood, you can't clot. You will internally bleed to death. With remdesivir, it is stated on the emergency use authorization, every patient has to have its prothrombin time checked before you give remdesivir and during treatment. Do you know what king cobra venom does to the blood?
It makes it so that it can't clot.
It makes it so it can't clot. You know what one of the evidences is? It's prothrombin time. And if you look at the CDC's website and the NIH's website on the adverse events from remdesivir, called Veklury, it actually says it increases prothrombin time, which is exactly what king cobra venom does to the human body.
There are lots of things that thin out the blood, that prevent clotting. Coumadin does that.
And remdesivir is lyophilized peptides, proteins of king cobra venom. The University of Arizona published last summer a paper when they actually evaluated the blood samples and tissues of people who died, hundreds of them, from 2 different hospitals, after being treated for COVID, which means they got what drug? Remdesivir. When they evaluated their blood, the title of their published article is
So if you can't read this, it says, like venom coursing through the body, researchers identify mechanism driving COVID-19 mortality. Researchers have identified what may be the key molecular mechanism responsible for COVID-19 mortality as an enzyme related to neurotoxins found in rattlesnake venom. Related to. Now, it's there again. Is there some validity to that? Could be. But does that mean that all of this is a giant conspiracy well, you're going to have to listen.
Welcome back. Why do some people, seemingly perfectly healthy, die from COVID and others don't? It's a question baffling experts during this pandemic.
That sure is. And new research from the University of Arizona suggests we're closer to getting an answer. As Team 12's Jess Winters explains, it seems to boil down to an enzyme that's also found in rattlesnake venom.
What does this rattlesnake have to do with COVID-19 deaths?
We turned much of my research in my lab towards COVID a year and a half ago.
Chilton says he got blood samples from more than 100 patients in a New York ICU. They either had no COVID, a mild, moderate, or severe case of the virus. He did some fancy schmancy artificial intelligence in his lab and discovered 2 distinct patterns in the people who were dying from COVID.
These patterns, number one, told us that The vital organs were in trouble, but the other looked as if they were being attacked by some enzyme.
He says he then found the highest concentration of this enzyme that has ever been found in humans.
These levels attacking internal organs means multiple organ failure and death.
So where do the rattlesnakes come into play?
This enzyme is a humanized version, part of the same family as the active ingredient in snake venom.
In simple terms, this enzyme related to rattlesnake venom that's been found in humans is likely causing tremendous damage, leading to COVID-19 deaths.
And then they take you through all of the elevated enzymes in the blood samples of these people that are naturally found in rattlesnake venom and viper venom that are in levels they've never seen before. You want to know how they got there? 5 to 10 days of remdesivir. They've known since 2005 if you inject a mouse with cobra venom, you inject it like they're doing with remdesivir, injecting it into your veins. It actually causes a cytokine storm in the lungs of all animals. I am convinced that COVID-19 is not a respiratory virus of any kind. It is actually venom poison, and they're using, I believe, synthesized peptides and proteins from venoms of snakes, and they're administering them and targeting them to certain people. Now,
He's convinced. He's convinced, right? Okay, but how are they doing this? And we're going to get there, which is why the title of this documentary is "Watch the Water." The premise, he's already made a decision about what is all of this is, and so therefore, any conclusion that he makes is going to be linked to his premise, his presupposition of what's causing this. He's not doing research; he's doing confirmation bias. There again, are the people behind this evil? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it's okay to go out there and speculate wildly to draw your conclusions.
amazing thing about these 19 toxins found in cobra venom, they're specifically sequenced to target specific organs, like the pancreas in a diabetic, like the heart in a heart disease patient, like the liver in a hepatitis patient.
Wait. So if I die because I'm a cancer patient, or if I die from some sort of liver-related function because I've had liver problems, if I die, then it'll be undetectable. It'll be untraceable. They're going to chalk it up. Of course this diabetic died.
This is the most original of all bioweapons ever. Snake venom. I mean, we know how poisonous snakes are. This is the most obvious bioweapon ever. When I say this is the most evil thing I've ever encountered in my entire life, could you ever have imagined that the one greatest symbol of evil in all of Christendom, what is the symbol of evil in Christianity?
The serpent.
The serpent.
And here, ladies and gentlemen, is where we begin to struggle. If we're really intent on having a logical and reasonable theological doctrinal approach to our perspectives and in the world as Christians, the serpent is not evil. The serpent's not evil. The snakes aren't evil. Snakes are neither good nor bad. They are strictly created creatures. They're strictly creatures created by God. And yes, the Bible is clear that Satan took the form in some way, shape, or form of the serpent, but that doesn't make the serpent evil. You don't see anywhere else in the Bible where snakes are considered evil. But Brian's asserting that they are. They are. Snakes aren't evil. They're just not. And so he's, snakes are evil, which is why these people are using snake venom to, and by the way, the vast majority of snakes in the world aren't venomous. Are there a lot of venomous snakes in the world? Sure. But just by volume, between the constrictors and the non-constrictors and the venomous, all the different venomous snakes that are out there, the majority of snakes that you're going to see in your life are not going to be venomous. Are all snakes evil, or just venomous snakes, Brian? What is it? And does being venomous make you evil? Well, why not spiders? Are spiders evil too? Did Satan choose? Did Lucifer, the morning star, did he choose the snake because the snake was inherently evil? The serpent was inherently evil? No. Is there symbiology in it? Sure. But the idea that the snake is somehow evil, and there again, this is your presupposition about where they're going with this, because it just gets deeper, folks.
Can you think of anything more evil than envenomating the entire world with snake venom and then injecting snake venom into your veins and then using mRNA technology that they've been isolating from snake venom for years that they know are unusually stable, more stable than any other mRNA they've isolated from other natural organisms for decades. 2015, they took mRNA from cobra venom, crate venom, and they actually wrapped the mRNA in nanoparticle hydrogel. I don't know if any of you heard about that with these new mRNA vaccines. And they made it even more stable. Then they actually added what's called dynabeads to those nanoparticle hydrogels surrounding the mRNA of snake venom. And it made it even more stable. It made it last longer. It made it easier to get inside of your cells. You know what dynabeads are? Magnetic metal nanoparticles.
Now, showing TikTok videos here of people sticking things to their arms where they allegedly got the jab, and then they're sticking. We have no idea what they're doing here. We don't know that they didn't have some sort of filmy adhesive on the back of these things. We're just to take this as proof that there's a magnetic substance in there that's sticking to this other magnetic substance. This is all conjecture. This is all being used. Look at this. Like, you got snake venom and you got magnetic beads in your body, and it's the mark of the beast, and it's RNA, and they're manipulating your DNA. And wait till you see where it goes with what they're doing with the DNA.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks? This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
This part, if it doesn't just pay very close attention to everything that happens here.
What's going on?
Your prayers have been answered, Donald. Apparently I'm dying.
Rob, could you get him a chair, please?
No. Fine. I've been poisoned.
Poisoned? By whom?
Someone within my organization. Someone with access to an offshore account that was used to fund recent attacks against me. 11 people had access to that account. Last evening, I called those 11 to a dinner to confront them. What happened next, I only remember pieces. The restaurant, what it looked like, not where it was. I remember holding a glass of wine, but not drinking it, although I'm sure I must have. I need you to find the pharmacotoxicologist who I believe crafted the deadly cocktail and get the antidote from him.
What do you know about him?
There's a man who told me he's known as
The apothecary.
A druggist whose potions hijack the immune system, causing any number of allergic reactions. Each one impossible to identify unless you know what you're looking for. An exotic venom might replicate a drug overdose. A personally tailored allergic reaction might trigger cardiovascular collapse.
The apothecary can create embolisms, aneurysms, inhibit respiration, induce paralysis. We're looking for corticosteroids, bronchodilator. Go. Apart.
Corticosteroids.
I've lived my entire adult life surrounded by it. Corona of death.
Corona of death.
Some days I even long for it, but lately I find I'm unwilling to go gentle into that good night.
Bronchodilator.
That is the bad news.
There's good news.
The lab did find one distinct element in the molecular structure of the drops taken from Robert Dolly's apartment. A peptide unique to the venom of Ungaris flawed, also known as the red-headed crite.
When I saw this, I knew I was right. I knew I was supposed to see that because it was confirmation to me that other people knew this was planned all.
So remember, God already sent a messenger through a text message to tell him to look into antivenoms. And now God used the blacklist from an episode in 2016 to confirm to him that he was right. Now, I'm not saying that Hollywood isn't corrupt. It certainly is. And I'm not even going to tell you that Hollywood doesn't do things like broadcast to us in many ways, shapes, and forms what's happening in society today, almost mocking us. But to insinuate that somehow there was this deeply spiritual reason for him to see this is just absolutely ridiculous.
Along, which we've known this is a plan. The FBI figures out that it's actually peptides found in crate venom that poisoned Reddington.
It's a TV show.
In the show, you learn that he was poisoned by drinking. It was put in his drink.
Wait till you see where he goes with this.
And then I realized something. I realized how they've been spreading this. I've actually told my wife 6 months prior to this that it's very odd when you go on the CDC's website that they have this wastewater surveillance tab on the COVID data tracker site. And they have 400 water testing sites in 37 cities in this country. What no one knows is the data from the CDC between January of 2020 and September of 2020 in relationship to their water testing of these 37 cities. They only let people know they were doing it in September of 2020 and now are releasing that data. They now just announced 2 weeks ago, Walensky did, of the CDC, that they're now upping their water testing. They say, and have been reporting to media outlets, that how it works is they are PCR testing our wastewater. Because we, as we get COVID-19, are pooping it in the water, and we're going to test our wastewater, and we can tell a city when there's high amounts of SARS-CoV-2 in the water, they can actually tell that same community 4 or 5 days later is going to be an outbreak of COVID-19 in that city.
Wait a minute. That's backwards.
That is completely backwards. If they
It's not completely backwards. What do we know about viruses? We know that you can oftentimes have the virus in your body. You're developing antiviral responses. Your body is working to shed that virus away from your body to fight it off. It's going into your waste system, whether it be through urine or fecal matter. That, of course, is going to get flushed down into the wastewater treatment facility. So no, it is not completely backwards. It's just a speculation. It's an assertion. That's backwards. The outbreak should precede the showing up in the wastewater. No, it's instantaneous. If you haven't, there again, I'm not arguing for the veracity of the federal state or the state. It's corrupt. But to sit here and say that, well, it's backwards. No, it's not. It doesn't make what you're saying is counterfactual.
community has had SARS-CoV-2 go through their body, they already had their symptoms.
No,
When they
that's not
eliminated
true.
The virus, supposedly the virus, out of their body and it ends up in your wastewater, you no longer have symptoms.
That's not
How
true.
could you know and then be able to confirm in the future, 4 to 5 days from now, when we find it in your wastewater supply from your city, when we see it being...
You could be shedding it before you ever show signs or symptoms. It's the case with influenza. It's the case with Legionnaires. You may be shedding that out of your body before you ever show symptoms because it's in there and it's replicating and it's getting washed out. This is an asinine argument.
being shed in your water, 4 to 5 days later, we can actually tell you there's going to be an outbreak in your city. It's not because there's an outbreak in that city, just like in the show Blacklist. I had to break this down for every aspect of COVID. One thing that's been very unique to COVID is this sense of loss of taste and smell that lasts for months, even years. Holy cow. I had no idea. They already knew this did this to people when you drink it. For the people who are the natural healers or the individuals who've got bitten, when they actually suck the venom of cobra into their mouth and then spit it out, they have this loss of taste and smell that can last 12 months, a year and a half. It's just from having it exposed in the mouth, which is exactly what's happening when it's being put into our water. Now, the thing about...
I have a friend. He and his wife have had contracted the Coof. They are on a private water system. And they got the Coof. Their neighbors aren't on a private water system, and they didn't have the loss of taste or sense. You know, I had the Coof. I didn't lose my taste of or my sense of taste or my sense of smell. It just all this blind speculation. Oh, well, let's see, because people suck the venom out of their natural healer. And they report that they lose the sense of taste and smell. Therefore, if COVID causes you to lose your sense of taste and smell, then it must be cobra venom.
The water is this. They are using the water systems because they can target specific demographics. They are absolutely confident that the peptides they have chosen for COVID circulated throughout the earth and throughout the populace specifically targets, and the vaccines and the mRNA in the vaccines specifically target organs like your spleen, your pancreas for diabetics, that's a concern, brain tissue, liver tissue, lung tissue, and heart tissue. So if you already have a disease process of inflammation of any of those organs, you are the ones they're targeting.
So the people that work at my water treatment facility are aware of this? They're in on it?
No.
Okay.
No, the CDC's in on it. And the CDC is working with contracting companies to make sure they do it.
Wild and kind. Kent is kind tasting to your taste bud.
CDC is working with contracting companies to do this in sometimes in very small towns.
Kind tasting to your throat, so there's nothing to disturb your full enjoyment of the goodness of Kent's finest quality tobacco.
I didn't lose my sense of taste, my sense of smell. I think I said that
there are
already.
nicotine receptors in your brainstem that control your diaphragm. Your diaphragm has to contract to be able to allow oxygen at all to get into your lungs. They are using crate venom and cobra venom, calling it COVID-19. You're drinking it, it's getting it into your brainstem, and it's paralyzing your diaphragm's ability to breathe. I cannot say this enough. In the very beginning of COVID, it was being reported around the world that the least demographic represented in hospitals being hospitalized for COVID-19 were smokers. Around the world, it was less than 5% of everybody in hospitals were actually smokers. And they found that odd only because this was a respiratory virus.
Doesn't make any sense.
Wouldn't it be that the people who are shoving tobacco and nicotine in their lungs would be more apt to be traumatized by a novel respiratory virus? But that's not what they saw. What was amazing is when this started getting reported in the first 6 months of COVID in 2020 around the world, guess what our federal government did? Anthony Fauci, the NIH, CDC, and the FDA all came out and started pumping in the media that there's no better time than right now to quit smoking. And they actually lied to you, and they lied to the entire world and said smokers are being hospitalized at rates higher than any other demographic. Well, the truth is, these nicotine receptors that are affected by cobra venom and crate venom that control your ability to breathe and was causing your oxygen levels to fall, that on a pulse oximeter looks like you have pneumonia. No, you weren't. You were being paralyzed. Actually, you couldn't breathe. And your heart rhythm was actually being dropped by the same receptors. Do you know that smokers, nicotine ties to those, and then cobra venom and crate venom can't bind to those receptors, so it can't paralyze your diaphragm?
So here's something that he's gotten wrong. So the Truth for Health Foundation, which is they're a pro medical freedom. They're pro positive information when it comes to the Coof and whatnot. They take much exception to much of what Brian says in this documentary. So here's a quote from them. Perhaps the most provocative claim Ardis made was around the sedation and mechanical ventilation of critical COVID patients. Because snake venom paralyzes muscles, including the diaphragm, the muscle most responsible for breathing, by blocking the conduction of signals between nerves and muscles. This, in his view, is more evidence that COVID is a snake venom-like illness. It is true that it was recognized early on that COVID patients had low levels of blood oxygenation, yet appeared to breathe comfortably and regularly. However, this is not representative of nerve paralysis. And notice his assertion just now was it was nerve paralysis that caused this. It is suggestive of a central process, one that involves the brainstem, not diaphragmatic paralysis. Moreover, our natural drive to breathe is much more dependent on high levels of carbon dioxide in our blood and not low levels of oxygen. Nevertheless, Ardis accused the medical system of intentionally causing the death of COVID patients by further reducing respiratory drive by using sedative agents like benzodiazepines, narcotics, and other drugs required to place patients on breathing machines. He is correct that these drugs are necessary to allow a person to tolerate the placement of a breathing tube in the trachea for prolonged and brief periods. However, once a person is connected to a ventilator, the machine will substitute for the person's lack of respiratory drive. So what they're saying is that he's making an assertion that these low oxygen numbers, anything under 90 is considered low when it comes to a pulse ox, are all due to a paralysis. And that's demonstrably not true. And this is coming from a very much a watchdog group who is against, the use of, can't even say the drug, and have pointed out the dangers of the drug as well. So they're not like in the camp of pro-government propaganda. They're just saying that what he's asserting is demonstrably untrue.
So they knew and were theorizing in France in April
and
of
Stu's
2020
just falling
when they
for it.
figured out that it was the nicotine receptors that control the diaphragm's ability to breathe was what the spike protein was targeting, because it most looked like the neurotoxin, neuro being brain, neurotoxin of crate and cobra venom. They started theorizing that studies need to be done that we start giving people nicotine to protect them from getting COVID. It absolutely is known that nicotine is protective against COVID-19 because it stops these venoms from damaging. And
notice what that said was a hypothesis about nicotine. It didn't say a fact about nicotine. It's a hypothesis.
Connecting to these nicotine receptors in your brain that control your diaphragm's ability to breathe. But once you go into a hospital because you can't breathe, if you're not a smoker and you don't do the nicotine, they put you on remdesivir. Remdesivir is venom from a cobra. It's attaching itself to the nicotine receptor.
Assertion. It is venom from a cobra. We don't know that. Okay, it's an assertion. It might look that way, but it's an assertion. It's absolutely an assertion.
Receptors in your brain, you then can't breathe, and then at the same time it destroys the inside of your lungs through what's called a cytokine storm. That is what cobra venom does.
We've got to get this guy on a ventilator, or this gal.
And then they say they got to put you on a ventilator. Why are they putting you on ventilators? They're putting you on ventilators because they're going to put you on sedation drugs to put you on the vent, and they can actually murder you by euthanizing you with drugs that act similarly to the venom. They have to sedate you because when they go to shove a tube down your trachea to get into your lungs,
you'll pull it out.
You'll pull it out, or you'll fight them as they're trying to shove it in there. So they have to sedate you. So they use morphine, fentanyl, Presidex, lorazepam, or midazolam. Those 5 drugs act on the same centers of your brain that control the diaphragm's breathing and your heart's ability to breathe. These drugs are euthanizing drugs, and they actually will put you on these protocols. At the same time they have you on remdesivir, the entire attempt is to slow down your breathing and your diaphragm, and you will die. They've got the cocktail down pat. The average person dies on day 9 of COVID-19 hospitalized treatment. They only authorize, per the NIH, 2 5-day treatments of remdesivir. It's amazing that the 9th day is the day that most people die. In February of 2020, the Wall Street Journal was allowed to produce an article, and they particularly speak to the word virus in coronavirus pandemic. And in this article, it actually states that the Latin definition historically for virus, originally and historically, virus meant and means venom. So I started to wonder, well, what about the name corona?
Okay, so here is where things like epistemology and etymology become very important. So just because the original Latin for venom or for virus is venom doesn't mean that we need to read into it now that the coronavirus is venom. No, it's a virus. I mean, the coronavirus, the common cold is a coronavirus. You mean to tell me that the common cold is snake venom? I mean, that's how we're supposed to interpret this. If we're going to go with Brian on where he's going with this, we don't have any other choice. This is why not understanding etymology and not understanding epistemology, which are very important philosophical studies and sciences, are incredibly powerful. You don't get to do this with words. You know, and I joke around about like the words like nice and stuff, like the original meaning of the word nice meant to be worthless. That's not what it means anymore. But what we have to understand here is just because you've read an article that says that the original meaning of the word virus meant venom doesn't mean that you get to now transport that to 2020 or 2021 or 2022 and now make this about cobra venom. And watch what he does next.
Does it have a Latin definition or a definition at all? So I actually looked up what's the definition. And on dictionary.com, it brings up 13 definitions. Corona, religiously, ecclesiastically, means gold ribbon at the base of a mitre. And I didn't know what a mitre was. So I copied it and pasted it and then hit images. So this actually could read the Pope's venom.
I need you to look at me. Look me dead in the eye. This is stupid. Absolutely asinine and stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Don't listen to this garbage. We went from maybe being able to have a scientific conversation about this to such wild speculation that just when you think it couldn't get worse, oh, it does.
Pandemic. It also can read crown. Corona means crown also in Latin terms. Corona means crown. Visually, we see kings represented with a crown symbol. So put that together for me. King, cobra, venom.
One more time. King, cobra, venom. Because virus and corona. Crowns go on kings. Viruses are venoms. So king, cobra, venom. That it's a form of numerology. It's a form of interpretation that hyper spiritualized, anti-logical, anti-reason, hyper mysticism. Goop. That's all it is. It's goop. Nobody should be doing this, but he's not done.
It actually could read King Cobra, Venom, Pandemic. I've said this for about a year now that I actually believe this is more of a religious war on the entire world. I've been adamant about that actually. The message of Christ forever was he's the master healer. And faith.
Just take a deep breath, ladies and gentlemen. I need you to listen to what he's about to say here, and then we're going to do a breakdown of it.
Precedes all miracles, not vaccines.
He made a blind man see.
Right.
He touched the leper.
So why are we actually putting more faith in drugs, and why is a man of the cloth supposedly putting more faith in science and a drug than he is in telling people to pray to God?
Do you take any kind of antibiotics? Do you take any kind of cancer drugs at all? And in another version of this conversation that he's having with Stu, he talks about how antivenoms or snake venoms are being used as cancer drugs, and some of them are being used to grow tumors, and some of them are being used to shrink tumors or control tumors, and on and on and on. So like, it's just, well, medicine can be a good thing. Medicine in and of itself is neither good nor bad, but wait till you hear what he does here.
God's greatest creation was you, and you are made up of a DNA strand of genetics that are unique to you. If I was going to do something incredibly evil, how ironic would it be that the Catholic Church or whoever would use the one symbol of an animal that represents evil in all religion, which is either the snake or the dragon, which is actually just a snake with legs. You take that snake or that serpent, and you figure out how to isolate genes from that serpent and get those genes of that serpent to insert itself into your God-given created DNA. I think this is the plan all along, was to get the serpents, the evil ones' DNA into your God-created DNA. And they figured out how to do it with this.
We're going to listen to that one more time, ladies and gentlemen.
Whoever was, he's the master healer. And faith precedes all miracles, not vaccines.
He made a blind man see.
Right.
He touched the leper.
So why are we actually putting more faith in drugs, and why is a man of the cloth supposedly putting more faith in science and a drug than he is in telling people to pray to God? God's greatest creation was you, and you are made up of a DNA strand of genetics that are unique to you. If I was going to do something incredibly evil, how ironic would it be that the Catholic Church or whoever would use the one symbol of an animal that represents evil in all religion, which is either the snake or the dragon, which is actually just a snake with legs. You take that snake or that serpent and you figure out how to isolate genes from that serpent and get those genes of that serpent to insert itself into your God-given created DNA. I think this is the plan all along, was to get the serpents, the evil ones' DNA into your God-created DNA. And they figured out how to do it with this mRNA technology.
Listen. Snakes aren't evil. Snakes aren't evil. I said that already. I'm just going to continue to say it. Snakes aren't evil. Now, we have to address the reality of the evil one, the enemy. He's the one making this emphasis that we're going to be injected with the DNA of the enemy. The enemy doesn't have DNA. The enemy, Satan, is spiritual. He is a spiritual being. He's created. He's a fallen angel. Angels are not physical. They are not physical. They do not have physical bodies. They are spiritual. They can manifest, or maybe even at times, maybe even influence an animal. We see this with Legion being cast in the herd of swine and the swine being driven into the ocean. But Satan doesn't have, the enemy doesn't have DNA. He doesn't have DNA. Your DNA cannot be changed to match the DNA of Satan. Do you see how stupid this is? Do you see how intellectually, theologically, doctrinally weak that this is? So if you're trying to make a point, why go here with this? So any valid point that you might have is out the window as a Christian when you go to this length. This is anti-Christian thought. You clearly don't understand, sir. You don't understand. And I will welcome you either on my show or on with Mike and I on Veteran Nation to have this conversation. But I can almost guarantee you will not sit down, because here's the thing. I don't trust the government. I tell people all the time, don't trust public sector. Don't trust the state. At the federal level, the state level, the county level, the local level, you don't trust the state. You don't trust them. But you don't need to go to these lengths to do this. This is bunk. Your DNA cannot be made to be the DNA of the enemy. At all. You can't. I don't care what your perspective is. Satan is a spirit, a created spiritual being, a fallen angel, the chief of the fallen angels. He is God's sworn enemy. But he doesn't have a DNA profile that can be put into a vaccine to change your DNA into the DNA of the enemy. This is why people don't take Christians seriously. And nobody should be taking this whole thing should be chucked right out the window just based on this alone. And anybody who's taking this seriously and can't hear how flawed doctrinally and theologically this is, needs to get away from YouTube, away from Rumble, away from the internet, and into the Bible, and then also study science.
You're using mRNA, which is mRNA extracted from, I believe, the king cobra venom. the king cobra venom. And I think they want to get that venom inside of you and make you a hybrid of Satan, no longer just belonging to God or a creation of God's. When I say that the mRNA inside of the Pfizer Moderna shots is actually derived from snake venom, it just sounds crazy, right?
Yes.
But I want you to read. I want you to read from July 6th, last year, 2021, the co-founder of Moderna. Read the title, show it to the camera.
Moderna co-founder using mRNA technology to treat venomous snake bites.
It goes on to say that he's going to help create and co-found a company called Ophirix. Look it up. It's phenomenal. Ophirix. Ophirix is a brand new company based in San Francisco that actually is going to solely work on creating anti-venom drugs for snake bites. Guess who funds this thing? The whole company.
The Department of Defense.
The Department of Defense, the Wellcome Trust Fund, and the United Nations. Incredible. Okay. All right, so this is great.
Let's wrap our heads around that for a second. How many snake bite victims are there?
It's like 100,000 people.
100,000 people will die from snake bites, but this is enough for the CEO of Moderna to make that this is a huge issue. But not only that, but the importance for the Department of Defense and for the United Nations to get on board and to fund such a venture.
Dr. Hoff out of Canada, after evaluating his vaccinated patients, was able to determine those who had received mRNA vaccines, they all had elevated D-dimers. And he checked that because they all complained of extreme fatigue, like long haulers COVID symptoms. And he was enlightened to do this D-dimer test and then found every single one of them had elevated D-dimers. Now I want you to read on Medscape. I just printed this out from medscape.com. What is it that medical doctors are trained to look for when they see elevated D-dimers? So read the title, and I want you to read the 5th bullet point.
How are elevated D-dimer levels interpreted? Snake venom poisoning.
So even
Truth for Health Foundation addresses this as well. Ardis accurately stated that snake venom can cause an elevated D-dimer, a non-specific finding in patients suffering from clotting disorders. But this test is elevated not only in patients who have excessive bleeding, as in the case of snake bite victims, but also in patients who are experiencing increased clotting, deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary emboli, and strokes. The latter is more common with severe COVID. Thus, an elevated D-dimer level does not necessarily mean COVID is caused by a snake venom-like process. So D-dimers can indicate lack of clotting and over-clotting. That's it. So it could be snake bites, could be something else. But he's gone straight to the conclusion, and he's got Stu reading it for him to lend it credibility. If D-dimers, elevated levels of D-dimers are present, it must be snake venom. That's all it is. That's just foregone conclusion. Because their goal is to make your DNA the same DNA as Satan. He said it, not me. I didn't say it. I didn't speculate it. He said it. It shows a very, very infantile understanding of Christian doctrine to think that the human body DNA can be changed to be that of Satan. Satan doesn't have a DNA marker.
Medical doctors are trained to look for elevated D-dimers and to know that this is a possible snake venom poisoning. And
Or it could also be somebody suffering from a clotting problem, like an overactive clotting problem. You don't bring that up, though, do you?
Notice they didn't use the word snake bite victim. Right. Snake venom poisoning. And I was like, oh my God, it's in the mRNA shots for sure. This is why you're seeing this. They even talk about it on here that D-dimer is a reflection of fibrinogen and its ability to control coagulation. And that it's usually at normal low levels inside of people who are fine. But then these D-dimers get extremely elevated after snake
venom poisoning.
The kidney failure caused by remdesivir is the #1 organ targeted by king cobra venom. It's the #1. There isn't anything in relationship to symptomatology of
Correlation is not causation, bro.
COVID-19, injuries post-COVID-19 vaccines, treatment with remdesivir that cannot be correlated back in research studies to venom from cobras, kraits, and other vipers.
So when somebody gets bit by a snake, particularly a king cobra or a crate, what is the long-term prognosis for these people? So these people that have been injected with this jab remorse, I mean, there's been a lot of people like Zev Zelenko, who I respect tremendously, has come out and said, you have a ticking time bomb inside of you. Is that true?
Yeah, your body has now had gene sequences put into you or peptides put into you of venom, and that actually continues, particularly one bite after another. Those disease processes become even more exaggerated. This is why they want to continue doing the booster shot program. My wife and I were driving back towards our home, and it's late afternoon. We dropped her car off at a mechanic shop, and she said, you need to get something to eat because I'll get hangry, a little snippy. When I get hungry, it's like 2:30 in the afternoon. And she goes, what would you like to eat? And I said,
so his conjecture here is that that the constant boosters to the jab are actually causing people to get sicker and sicker and sicker. But scientifically speaking, many people develop over time an immunity to certain toxins and snake venoms after having been exposed to snake bites on a repeated basis. And there are examples of this in scientific journals where now they're even having people who have been exposed either intentionally or accidentally to venoms. They're now using the serums from their blood to produce antivenoms. So, Brian, you've got to make sure that, one, from a Christian perspective, that doctrinally and theologically, you're using logic and reason for some of the stuff that you say, too, because you're so far off doctrinally and theologically on some of this stuff. Your understanding of Satan and who the enemy is and whether or not snakes are evil and therefore a symbol of evil, like because they're associated with Satan, that's off, which completely discredits you as far as being a reasonable, logical person on this. Two, you don't get to assert that these jabs are equivalent to being bitten over and over and over again by a venomous snake, because there are cases and there are studies that show you can develop immunity, which can also help develop antivenoms for that.
Let's just go to this Chinese restaurant right here. And she looked at me, she goes, really?
Pay close attention to this, because this is the kind of stuff that is just should not take place in Christendom.
We haven't had Chinese food in years. I mean, it's been at least 5 years. So we go into this payway, order the food. I go to the bathroom. By the time I come out to the bathroom and sit down, my wife's already got the foods sat in front of her, the plates, and then there's 2 fortune cookies that Jane has selected out of a barrel. But my wife is a desserts first kind of girl. So when I sat down at the table, the fortune cookie's already open and she's already eaten it. And the fortune cookie's sitting there above her. The fortune is sitting above her plate. So I sat down, I looked at her and I said, well, I guess I'll eat my dessert first too, since you did yours. I guess I'll open up my fortune cookie. So I opened the fortune cookie and I cracked it open. And it's opposite the plate, across the plate. And when I cracked it open, the back of the paper of the fortune was facing me. And I quickly saw it as I separated the 2 ends, and I just spun it around real quick to face me. And I picked it up and read it to my wife, and it reads something like this. All of the world's greatest riches begin with 1 penny. I said, I looked at Jane, I was like, of course it does. Like, who doesn't know that, right? And I sat it down, and she's looking at me as she's eating. She's like, are you going to eat? And I was just staring at the the actual paper, fortune. And I said, yeah, I'll eat in a minute. And she goes, what's wrong? And I said, it's what's on the back of that fortune cookie that's freaking me out. And usually you'll see like lottery numbers or something random on the back of those cookies. But what I noticed was the name on the back of that fortune. In parentheses on the back of that fortune, as soon as I opened it, were two names. I knew that God was telling me, you can't give up and you have to tell the world.
If you didn't catch that, that name is the scientist who was assassinated, was about to release all of his information. I'm just going to say this. As apparently a hyper-spiritual Christian, what are you doing looking at a fortune cookie in the first place? That's occultism. Why are you doing that? And if you're really worried that science is trying to turn humanity, the Imago Dei, into some weird bastardization between human and Satan, what are you having anything to do with occultism like fortune cookies? And why are you reading into that? Liu Bing, why are you reading into that? Look, ladies and gentlemen, it is absolutely ridiculous for us to think that there isn't some sort of actual conspiracy on the part of the powers that be, the oligarchs in the United States and around the world, to lessen the population of the world. It's absolutely ridiculous for us to think that that will not happen, hasn't happened, and won't continue to happen. It's ridiculous also for us to think that they won't come up with interesting ways to try and kill us off. They certainly will. But to make the logical leaps, illogical leaps, that are based on a presupposition of what you want it to see, it is even worse. And like I said, to have a theological or doctrinal understanding that is so weak that you are willing to read into a text message something hyper spiritual, to read into a fortune cookie the words for ice skating, that's a command from God to tell you to not give up. That's the implication. And just on and on and on. It's weakness. To read into the name virus and corona and call it the king cobra venom pandemic. Like that's playing too fast and too loose with etymology. It's playing too fast and too loose with epistemology. It's playing too fast and too loose with philosophy and reason. You're playing fast and loose with science. You're not giving full definitions. You're twisting definitions to say that the monoclonal antibodies are all anti-venoms. That's not the case. Are antivenoms monoclonal antibodies? Yes, but not all monoclonal antibodies are antivenoms. And you just, these reaches and these jumps, and it'd be one thing if it was accidental, but at some point you have to recognize this is all intentional. And the numerology of, oh, here this number 19 means this, and this happens here, and we've got this number there, and we've got these things, and we've got this, and on and on and on. Numerology and mysticism, and I mean high-handed mysticism, not like the Lord spoke to me from the scriptures and moved in my spirit, like not one mention of how much we can garner from scripture about these understandings. Nope, your conclusion is the evil forces of the world are trying to turn us all into DNA combinations of who we are as human beings and Satan. What? Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we need to be incredibly careful. Incredibly careful with what we watch, what we take in, what we allow ourselves to believe. Period. This is ridiculous reportage. And once again, I will gladly have Brian on. I will gladly sit down and have this conversation with him, preferably here on my platform or on Vet Nation, or both. But it's not going to be softball questions, and it's not going to be easy, because I'm not going to sit here and nod and go, ooh, good point, good point. Oh, good point, good point. Because a lot of this stuff, when researched properly, in a very short period of time, by the way, by someone who's not a doctor, which of course will discredit me in many people's eyes, which would be another logical fallacy. And if you want to challenge me, we'll have a conversation about that. This is not how you counter the evil of the world. This is not helpful. So I really appreciate everybody watching, and I look forward to your feedback. I am probably going to put this all out as one. Once again, make sure you're checking out the merchandise and give me feedback. I really look forward to hearing what people have to say about this. I will engage with you civilly, but if you come at me and attack me as being unpatriotic, attack me as being deep state, if you attack me as being not educated enough to have this conversation, I'll just say, okay, what's your education level? That's going to justify you saying that I'm not educated enough. So we can all play that game. If you're going to attack my Christianity for this, you better bring bigger guns than what he did with this whole idea that our DNA can be changed to match that of Satan's. So if you're going to come at me, you come at me reasonably, logically, and biblically. Because this, and I shouldn't even have spent the amount of time I did on it, but I keep getting told I need to watch, I need to watch, I need to watch. So I did it out of respect for the people who said I need to watch. And I walked away even more convinced after all the research I've been doing since yesterday until this afternoon when I filmed this. It's Sunday afternoon. I'm more convinced here on Resurrection Sunday that this is nothing more than something to take our eyes off the real goal, which is to pay attention and to be active at the local level. It's just more, it's tantamount to the far-flung QAnon stuff where people keep telling me that Governor Walz has been arrested and transported to Gitmo and already faced a military tribunal, is awaiting execution. And at the same time, we've put his double in here in Minnesota, so no one knows, and that all the people in Washington, D.C. have all been arrested and flown away, and that Trump's coming back in. And I keep hearing all this stupid crap from people all the time. He's like, stop listening to this stuff. Just fight the fight at home. That's what we need to do. If you don't want to take the jab, don't take the jab. If you don't want to get sick, take precautions to not get sick. And don't watch the water. It's just not helpful. Until next time, Sic Semper Tyrannis.
We are go for liftoff in T-minus 30. Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark. Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at